Good morning, members and officers in the chamber, online and any residents who are viewing the live stream. My name is Bill Crease. I'm Chair of the Corporate Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all. There are a couple of pieces of housekeeping I'd like to get out of the way before we get into the agenda. First off, I'd like to formally list my thanks for Councillor Shawcross for deputising for me for the last 3 months whilst I've been ill. His support throughout has been well appreciated. I'd also like to thank officers and members who got in touch with me whilst I was in the hospital and after I came out, offering support and encouragement. It is very much appreciated. The only other thing I'd like to say is the agenda today is 17 items long. So I'm going to have to remind people that the order and number of durations of questions from members to the committee shall be determined by the chair. That's a direct quote from the Constitution. To ensure everyone gets a fair crack of the whip, I'll be asking you for one question each when I invite you to ask a question. Once that question is answered, I'll move on to the next questioner. And if I get through all the questions that have the individuals who have requested permission to ask a question, I'll then start cycle 2 and cycle 3. But we do have 17 agenda items to get through, so we're going to have to manage our time collectively today a bit better than we may have done in the past. So we'll get on to agenda item 1. Do we have any apologies?
Chair, there's an apology, no apology from the committee members, Chair, but there is an apology from Councillor Linda Thomas, who is the Cabinet Member for Customer and Corporate Services, who is not here today. So if there's any questions directed to Councillor Thomas, then they'll be fielded by the Cabinet Member who is present today, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to item 2. Oh, Gareth, sorry, you're indicating.
Yeah, Rod Taylor sends his apologies as well, Chair. I'll be covering his report later on the agenda for him.
Thank you. We're going to agenda item 2, then declarations of interest, including whipping declarations, to receive any declarations and advise members accordingly. Nobody's indicating, so we'll go on to item 3, the minutes, and I'll go through page by page. For accuracy, if you have any questions, could you please indicate? So we've got page 7, page 8, page 9, and page 10. Nobody's indicating. Could I have a mover for the minutes, please? Councillor Coggins-Cogan, a seconder, Councillor Healy. All those in favour? Thank you. Against? Abstentions? Thank you very much indeed. We're now on to agenda item 4, urgent matters. None have been raised, so we'll go straight to item 5, action tracking. That's pages 11 to 14 of your report, and that sits with Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the monthly report that comes back, the committee report that comes back every committee to keep track of any actions open from previous meetings. Members will note there are 2 on the agenda item in Appendix 1. The one in relation to the holiday pay, that was an update due to come at the report that sits under, which is under item 11, the revenue budget monitoring reports. That will be dealt with there. And I will just follow up the outstanding one from the December meeting about the asset transfer element there, but happy to take any questions, Chair.
Do we have any questions? Councillor Swash.
Thank you, Chair. On page 14, number 8, about cemeteries, it says to seek a written update from the bereavement services manager on the introduction of above ground burials in Flintshire. It says response circulated to committee. I don't think I've had a copy of that response. I'm not sure if others have.
Chair, that has been prepared, so I will make sure that I'll double check to make sure. But we had it back from the service, so I'll recirculate if need be. Councillor Swash.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Nobody's indicating, so could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Healy, a seconder. Councillor Clayton. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you. That's carried. Go on to item 6, the forward work programme. Again, this sits with Democratic Services Manager's team. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is the decision item that comes to committee about the forward work programme for the committee for the coming months. Members will know that in Appendix 1, there is no meetings scheduled for April or May. That's due to the election period where members of my service move across to run the election for the Welsh Government. So we don't hold meetings in that period. The next one, therefore, is 11th of June. It does look light on the agenda, but there are, in paragraph 104, a number of items will be scheduled through June and July. I'm just waiting for confirmation of dates when they will appear on that on those dates, Chair. Members of the committee and others are obviously entitled to put forward any items for inclusion on the forward programme, and there is some guidance in 108 of what the requirements are to submit items for the forward work programme. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Do we have any questions or proposals from members? Nobody's indicating, so we can go straight to, can we have a proposal for the recommendation? Councillor Mullen, a seconder. Councillor Shawcross. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. Proceed to agenda item number 7, the Audit Wales review of commissioning, and I believe Gareth is going to lead on this.
Chair. Chair, I'm going to start by just quickly defining what commissioning is, because people often confuse it with other things. Commissioning is a thought process about what we want from service and how best to deliver it. It isn't procurement, though it can lead to procurement. People often confuse the two. Commissioning, if done properly, can actually lead to insourcing rather than procurement as well, as I'll pick up slightly later on. So Audit Wales undertook this review in 2024. It took a long time to finalise the report, for which I apologise. Well, it took a long time to finalise the report with them, and slightly longer again to bring it back to committee. You will see from the report that they found a mix of both good and bad practice within the council, or weaknesses within the council, and I've listed the examples of both strengths and weaknesses at paragraph 1.02 and paragraph 1.03 within the report. In terms of strengths, we've got, we take a holistic view around our commissioning. We collaborate very well with Denbighshire. We monitor performance and we capture lessons within portfolios. We could consider collaborating more widely with others other than just Denbighshire. We could share information between portfolios, and there is, whilst it is limited, there are examples of where contracts are placed. If a commissioning exercise has led to procurement, there are examples where contracts have been placed by different services with the same provider, and we need to share our learning from that internally better. I've given you some examples of where we've done commissioning, and I talked previously about commissioning leading to insourcing. An example that's not in the report within my own portfolio of commissioning leading to insourcing is housing disrepair claims. Members will know that we have housing disrepair claims. They're often done on a no-win, no-fee basis, and we've seen an increasing number over recent years. We don't have the skills or capacity within the legal team at present to handle those, and so those claims have been handled externally. By examining the level of spend, though, with those external solicitors, we've concluded that actually it would be more cost effective for us to do the work in-house. And so the HRA has agreed to fund a couple of extra posts in the legal team to undertake housing disrepair claims. And that's an example of a commissioning process saying, right, okay, what's the best, most cost-effective way to deliver what we need to deliver? And then examining whether that might be private sector collaboration or insourcing, and it's resulted in insourcing. And it's worked both ways, Chair. We, again, from my own portfolio, the housing team in particular had some concerns about the out of hours service that we were receiving, and pressed for Rebecca Jones and the customer services team to bring the service in-house. Becky analysed the costs, pulled together a projected service model, and discovered that it would actually cost a lot more to deliver the service in-house than it did with through the external provider. And so what we did was we went back to the external provider, secured improvements in their processes and their service, and placed another contract with Delta, who are operated by Carmarthenshire County Council. So you can see both ways there. The commissioning process is that thought process beforehand about how we best deliver things. So the recommendation is that we should strengthen commissioning practice. Now, part of the problem, as I say within the report, is that commissioning practice is sometimes overlooked and suffers a bit from a lack of profile at present. Because, as I say, the only thing that we've got called a commissioning form is actually a form that you fill in to go out to procurement. So it's actually, commissioning is almost seen as a hurdle that needs to be overcome before you can get to the point of placing an external contract, and which to some extent doesn't do that necessary thought process justice. So what I've done, Chair, in response to the recommendations about trying to strengthen the procedure, is drafted a commissioning strategy for the council that will hopefully prompt, and it will need to be backed up by an evidenced thought, evidence process, but that prompts that thought process and prompts us also to consider commissioning in light of our responsibilities under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So one of the things that, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, it has, ways of working, one of which is around reducing cost in the public sector, reducing duplication in the public sector. And so for that reason, the commissioning strategy very consciously says, right, if you're going to deliver that service at all, and that should be the first question, are we going to deliver that service at all? Then you need to consider whether we can and should be doing this in collaboration with another local authority first. If we're not going to do it with another local authority, let's look at other parts of the public sector and or the third sector before we then look at, if we're going to do the service ourselves in-house, transforming the service, and then as a last option, looking at whether we go out to some sort of commercial procurement. And as I say, that then leads us through that process, consider whether we can save costs, which is obviously important given the financial position of the council. In many cases, that won't be possible. We've got statutory duties to deliver a lot of services. So if we've got that, can we do that more cheaply in conjunction with somebody else? And at each stage, you move on from one stage to the next in that commissioning process, Chair, by considering what's going to deliver the best value for money in terms of cost and in terms of achieving the aims that we set out to achieve. Because not every service that we deliver will have, sometimes the aims that we wish to achieve will be non-financial, won't they? We've got an example in housing, and some of you will know this, where they've bought some software recently that maximises the benefit take-up of our residents. Clearly there, the aim for us is a policy aim, a social benefit policy aim, rather than trying to save the council money. It's about trying to derive more money for our residents. So, but in each case, we have to take that decision. How best do we achieve this? How can we achieve this more cheaply if we move on to the next stages? And Chair, we also need, as well, aligned to this, to look more broadly and to look more frequently at how we can collaborate with with other authorities. So as well as having that sort of thought process within the commissioning strategy itself, assuming the approach is proved, that we would, as an organisation, use our professional networks to periodically consider whether, as services, we can collaborate more often. So members will know, you've heard me talk about it often. I chair the legal meeting group for North Wales. I also chair a group for the whole of Wales of monitoring officers. When I meet with them, we might talk about, well, can we jointly work on procuring legal services, or can we work, in the case of the IT services who report to me on procuring mobile phones collaboratively and that sort of thing. And that's important because it is the services that drive commissioning and are the best place to know how best to deliver the services for which they're responsible. And so it should be those professional networks that are at the forefront of deciding whether we can and are able to collaborate with other authorities. So, Chair, we've got the recommendations. I've prepared an action plan. I've also prepared a strategy. I'm happy to take questions.
Gareth, the last section of your report, you started breaking up. It may improve service if you drop your camera and just stayed on voice. We know you're there. Very distinctive.
Certainly better for you, Chair, if you don't have to look at me. Yeah, certainly better for you if you don't have to look at me. So what I was saying, Chair, is that there are the recommendations, but services themselves need to think about using their professional networks, whether they can collaborate more. There are a number of professional networks, and they periodically need to be going through that process of saying, well, look, we all do this or we all do that. How can we all get value for money from that? Because, of course, it's all very well and good at us saying we want to collaborate with somebody, but if there is nobody else willing to collaborate with us, then we can't. So in terms of supporting the approach that I've outlined within the strategy, we need the professional services themselves to be having those conversations as well. We've got the recommendations. You can see the action plan to address those recommendations, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Coggins-Cogan, you were indicating.
Thank you very much, Chair. In acknowledgement to what you said at the beginning of the meeting, I will keep my comments very short. Essentially, what Audit Wales has identified is a sort of a culture within the council where we can do a bit better. In particular, sorry, Chair, I'm just looking for my page. I wrote my notes. In particular, I mean, if the council is saying, it's accepting what Audit Wales has said, which is saying that we need to do better on the costs and options and defining value for money, I think members, communities and residents are entitled to the same mindset when the council is considering large educational reorganisations. So I'm proposing a fourth proposal, or fourth resolution, which would be a recommendation from officers, I think, which I've given to Steve to assist. So I can't find my photograph of the copy now. So Steve, have you got the copy of the text? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I could also just point out that the recommendations in the report are to approve, and obviously that is not something that the committee can do. So they would, if anyone does move the recommendations, they would need to be amended accordingly. But just for clarity there, Chair. The recommendation that submitted by Councillor Coggins-Cogan, as you mentioned, is that Cabinet be requested to revisit the alternative, I think that says alternative, in the Catholic school closure programme in light of the Audit Wales review of commissioning.
Yes, that's correct. It's essentially, if we have this mindset about commissioning, I know education is different, but we obviously have a problem with defining value for money. I do not believe this school, which will cost the public purse £77 million and up to £10 million over the lifetime of the project in transport costs, represents value for money. So I'm proposing this added recommendation for the Cabinet to revisit the options, and there are alternatives to the proposals that are currently being pursued. Thank you, Chair.
So we have an additional recommendation from Councillor Coggins-Cogan. That's essentially a proposal. I need to second it for that. Do we have somebody? Councillor Ibbetson's indicating. Thank you. So Gareth, you're indicating.
Chair, if it's an additional recommendation, does that imply that the first three recommendations are also being moved?
Yep, thank you.
With the alteration that the Democratic Services Manager has mentioned, yes, I'm happy to move the others as well.
So Chair, they would be to comment on the report, and any comments would be then fed back to Cabinet as a standard one that we tend to use for such reports.
Well, any other questions or comments? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, it's just to say value for money isn't always about finances. It also includes, and this will probably be mentioned, I'm sure Councillor Cogan understands that. So there'll be lots of other information there that will offset that financial pressure, such as educational needs, educational provision. So it's just to kind of balance that. But I'm usually the one who talks about finance, aren't I? But I also have to think about the other things that benefit from that as well. So thanks.
Yeah, I have my own notes here where, as an outcome of reading this particular report, I've got in bold letters, value for money is not just financial. And I'm sure the work done by this council to achieve social benefit on everything it does is commendable. Okay, then, so we've no other comments. We're going to move to a vote, and I'll take the recommendations on block. So they've been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Against? So that drops, that falls. Oh, can we, sorry? Can we just revisit all those in favour, please, so we can get accurate numbers? All those against? Thank you. So that falls.
So you've got nothing on the table now.
There's nothing on the table by way of recommendations or proposals. Do we have anyone? We need another set. Oh. So we're seeking other proposals. Ideally, I guess, something related to 1, 2 and 3 in the papers. Is anybody prepared to propose?
Surely, Chair, those have just been rejected, so we can't propose them in a different format or try and sort of circumvent them. They have been rejected. So either the report has to be deferred to another time, or someone can propose that we do not support the recommendations as written, but we can't use a different wording to affect the same effect. Sorry, Chair.
Gareth?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, there has been very little comment on the perceived subjective value of the proposals and the strategy. Do members think they're good, bad, indifferent? Are there areas where it might be improved? If members were to put forward comments in that regard, perhaps it might help us around the impasse.
Thank you. I do have some notes from my own reading of the report and a couple of observations that, it wasn't all bad. There were some weaknesses identified, and the two recommendations, the recommendation 1, value for money, as Councillor Jones has said, and my own notes, that we need to be very careful as a council that we don't just have pound signs in front of every decision. We are under huge pressure financially as a council, as every other council is. but we need to be mindful about the work we do and the work we procure to ensure that, one, we're doing it in the best way possible, and two, we're deriving the very best benefit we can for the people of Flintshire and the wider community as well. And that touches on recommendation to the collaboration element. My own personal view of council business is we should view collaboration as a positive element, and we should be out looking in detail at what we can do together. So the work done to come up with a plan for commissioning appeals to me greatly, personally. I think it's a long overdue step forward. Councillor Swash, you're indicating.
I'm a little perplexed as to why we're now commenting on the report, given that a majority of the committee have just voted against commenting on the report, because that was the first recommendation. So I'm not sure why we're now commenting on a report after the committee has voted not to do that.
As I said, I've ended up with a good one to come back with. Excuse me. Well, I would suggest then that I propose a recommendation that this report goes back to the author and is represented at the earliest possible date after today. Councillor Jones?
Only a very quick thing. Well, I think what the monitoring officer was suggesting, it's not my place to comment really. I think what the monitoring officer was suggesting, that if we couldn't provide those recommendations to Cabinet, at least understand your views rather than just nothing. And that would be really useful it would have been really useful to have those views on the subject when we come to make that determination at Cabinet. So, I mean, personally, I think it would be a great idea if somebody just would carry on the conversation, because I understand what Councillor Swash is saying, but it's always of interest to me and the Cabinet, the comments by scrutiny members, so that we get a better, more fuller discussion when we get to Cabinet. So I don't know what members think. That's just my view.
So
carrying on with the comments, I was particularly interested to see about the reporting cross portfolio. There has been incidents where we have had overspend, which is I'm thinking particularly about health and social care and cross, and we've looked at the provision, and we've also looked at spending in different places. And I think to look at the system in both portfolios would be very useful. So in commissioning in the future, I think councillors would appreciate that far more.
Thank you. Councillor Ibbotson, you're indicating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on a point of order, the Constitution says nobody will speak until a motion has been moved and seconded. We do not have a motion moved or seconded, so none of the people you're inviting to speak should be speaking until something has been moved or seconded. Nothing has been moved or seconded. We have no motion on the table. Nobody seems minded to move legitimate motion. The Cabinet member's suggestion that we ought to just discuss things without a motion on the table is not in accordance with the Constitution. Unless anybody's going to move anything that can be moved, we need to move to next business, Mr. Chair.
Ibbotson, I did propose. I'm waiting on a seconder for my proposal. That seconding has been indicated by Councillor Coggins-Cogan. So there is a proposal on the table, and we're debating that proposal.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, essentially, what I believe on seconding is essentially a procedural motion, which is say this is to be represented and the item is over for this meeting. So
we've had a proposal, we've had a second. Can we move to the vote on this item, please? The recommendation being that this goes back to the author and comes back at the earliest possible date for consideration by crossed. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? That's carried. We move on to agenda item 8, please. It's a council plan review, part 2 document for 26-27, and this sits with the Chief Executive.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So members will be aware in relation to the development of the new council plan for 25 to 30, the 3 priorities: people, place and prosperity. So within the priorities, the actions, measures and risks within the report. So the report before you this morning covers the part 2 elements of the plan, and that covers 26-27. So we're looking ahead from April onwards. So part of the review, 62 actions and measures have been removed and 67 new actions and measures have been added. Appendix B of your report summarises the adds and omits, with Appendix A covering the measures, actions and risk narratives and targets. You will be familiar with the layout and style of the new report, so I'm not going to sort of walk you through all that, but essentially the report is therefore submitted for your consideration and comment. And just one point to raise on recommendations: it does say approve. I suggest, Chair, that that's changed to consider and comment on the draft council plan part 2 document for 26-27 for adoption.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Just bearing in mind the previous discussion, I know there's only one recommendation here which has been amended, but so it does help Cabinet, perhaps if we could do each recommendation separately, if there's an amendment to it, rather than on block, in which case we consider the amendments and the existing recommendations stay as they were, unless those are amended. But individually, if you see what I mean. I think that might be a way forward. Thank you.
I have established that in my own head almost immediately. If I'd taken the recommendations individually, we wouldn't have ended up in the position we're in. So please accept my apologies, one and all, for that. Thank you. Do we have any other comments? Questions? Can we have a proposal for the recommendation then? And the recommendation is to consider and comment on the draft council plan 25-30 part 2 document for 26-27. We have proposer Councillor Claydon, thank you, seconded by Councillor Healy. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? That's carried. Thank you very much indeed. We move on to agenda item 9, the corporate risk register, and again this sits with the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. So members will now be familiar with the corporate risk register. Following a review of the 13 corporate risks, 2 have been de-escalated and will now be monitored at portfolio level. 4 risks remain red, with one of those 4 deteriorating, and that relates to RSS 54, care, provision, suitability. There are 7 amber risks. 2 of those have improved. Essentially, what we're saying there is the risk score has improved, but they still remain amber. And 2 are further improved risk scores. I'm not proposing to take you through the report, Chair. If you want to ask any questions, feel free. Thank you.
Any questions from members? Comments? Councillor Ibbotson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 areas of concern. One is regarding risk RPE 46 on page 142 of the bundle, which I don't consider is rated high enough, particularly lack of adaptation. It's sort of primarily focused on sort of corporate reputation side of things. And secondly, RGV 01 on page 128. The proposed adoption of an AI policy opens up additional risks given the wording of that. which I would suggest should lead to a small upgrading in the risk score there. I'm not going to ask any questions because I want to save my question for a later agenda item. I'd just note those and the chilling effect that this is having on questioning. I know that we've just had voted to comment on an item where nobody made any comments. I'd suggest that this is not, constructive. And I'm sure Audit Wales will be watching this meeting in the context of their review of scrutiny at this council with interest.
I value your comments, Councillor Ibbotson. However, because of the time constraints on this meeting, nothing untoward has been done. I've given, and I will give everyone the opportunity to speak and ask questions if they so desire. Your implication that somehow I'm stifling debate does not sit comfortably with me. Do we have any other?
Thank you, Chair. Page 125, REY01, the financial viability of schools. It's noted that schools are not financially viable due to insufficient base funding and an increasing number of schools are entering a deficit budget position. That's partly because the money follows the pupils and an increasing number of parents are removing their pupils from schools where the schools are at risk and the future of the school is uncertain. So I would suggest that the councils, I can see the chair smiling at my well-worn track, but there are schools that before the consultation on their closure happened, they were not in a budget deficit position. They were in a budget surplus and were managing their budgets well. Since the consultation, since the statutory objection period, where we've had 9,000 contacts from people, they have now moved into a deficit position precisely because of the uncertainty and parents moving their children to other schools. So it is an own goal and it is the council's own policy that has driven these schools into a deficit position. Thank you, Chair.
Your comments are noted. Do we have any other speakers? Nobody's indicating. Come with a proposal for the recommendation, which is to acknowledge the risks on the corporate risk register and be assured that the mitigating actions for each risk on the corporate risk register are adequate to manage the risk. Do we have a proposer? Councillor Clayton, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Mullen, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. Move on to agenda item number 10. Which is gender pay report. And this is going to be taken by Shan, I believe. Thank you.
Bora Darpow, good morning. I think the first thing I need to say is that this report, what you will, members of committee will note, looks very different to the report that I brought last year, which included all of our diversity data. We report the diversity data in the strategic equality plan as well as an annual workforce report, so it felt that there was significant duplication. What we're going to do going forward is to look to rationalise the number of reports and develop a dedicated equality page on our website, which will host a dashboard of all of the metrics so that it's visible and accessible to everybody. The reduced data set in this draft gender pay gap report then is to comply with our statutory obligations under the Equality Act 2010 gender pay gap information regulations based on the snapshot date of the 31st of March 25. The draft gender pay gap report, which is appended to this report, is based on 6,714 occupied positions and the pay of those employees in the positions as at 31st of March. This does represent a decrease of 171 positions when compared to the 31st of March 24 report. In the second paragraph on page 158, I've listed the calculations that we are required to publish. We don't have any bonus payments in the council, so therefore I don't have data in relation to that to share. What is important to note is, according to the Office for National Statistics, among all employees, the gender pay gap decreased to 12.8% in 2025, down from 13.1% in 2024. Our overall gender pay gap, though, is better than that, which I think is really important to note. Ours is sitting at 10.74%. And I've obviously put all of the calculations for all of the others in paragraph 1.04. The same ONS report also reports a full-time median hourly earnings rate across the UK at £20.27 for men and £18.87 for women. Ours hourly earnings for the same period were £20.16 for men and £21.14 for women. So bucking the trend of what we're seeing nationally. And that's obviously because we have got more women in our upper quartiles than men, which again is at odds with the national statistics, but a very positive one from our perspective. Thinking about bigger picture and conclusion, I guess, we have a very robust, fair and equitable process of job evaluation, which is why we're seeing the figures that we're seeing. Jobs of equal value are graded consistently, which differs to the private sector where salary packages can be individually negotiated. We obviously, as you are aware, report on and publish our pay policy statement annually to provide complete transparency in relation to our approach to setting pay. Therefore, any gap that we have, we believe, is as a result of work that males and females choose to do rather than any differential in terms of what we pay in terms of male and women. We've seen incremental improvements year on year between 2017 and 2025, which again, I think is really, really positive. And we attribute that to the structured control of our pay and grading approach and some of our proactive recruitment. In 1.07, we have noted a number of actions that we'll continue to take to make further progress. And obviously going forward, as the Employment Rights Act is implemented, we will monitor the impact on pay gap in relation to disability pay gap along with others. But as I said at the outset, the intention is to build a dashboard that will be cited on our website so that it's there all year and completely transparent for everybody to see. So happy to take any questions.
Councillor Colgan.
Thank you, Chair. On page 165, under the gender pay gap analysis, there's the table which has the overall pay gap at 10.74%. The bit that I'm going to ask a question on, it's the line item, the chief officer and chief executive. Although that's the smallest bit, I think it sends a signal to the workforce across the county, sort of at the top of the tree, to make sure things are equal. Since I started here, since I was elected in May 22, there have been, I think, 2 appointments to the chief officer team, and they were both male, which was the chief officer for planning and the chief officer for social services. So I would assume they were at sort of the bottom of the pay scale for that thing. So I'm still surprised that there is a bit of a difference between the male and the female. Is that because the chief executive is male and that's what's skewing that bit of a gap there? I think at the top of the tree, you know, if we can get that bit equal, then it filters down. Not that I'm saying we do trickle down nonsense, that type of business, but I think as a sort of a statement of intent and as a, you know, our policy, if everything is equal right from the top, I think then it gives people a certain amount of assurity sort of going forward in this organisation that males, females are all treated equally. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, God, sorry. Yeah, there's a combination of factors there. Obviously, the 2 newest appointments, as you've said, are both male. And as is typical across the organisation, unless there's a business case to justify otherwise, everyone starts at the bottom of the scale. And there are 4 incremental points. So at the moment, so that may change as we go through. The one thing I can assure you is that all of our roles are graded, job evaluation graded, and irrespective of sex or otherwise, if somebody secures that post, they are paid at that grade. There is no differential whatsoever. We do take positive steps to try and encourage in underrepresented groups, because we know that you know, you think about in schools, we've got traditionally it's part-time women, and same as in care, we could do with having some more gentlemen in those. So we do, but absolutely every role is properly evaluated. But that disparity at the moment is because you've got two gentlemen who've come in at bottom of scale. Chief exec is not quite at top of scale either, but that's what skews the figures. It will look different when I run that report next year because they'll have moved up the scale.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come back. So, okay, so I mean, that is the bit that sort of surprised me, because the in that headline figure, the average salary for the male chief officers is higher than the figure for the female chief officers, but that discrepancy is down to, you know, the accident that the chief executive happens to be male, and that's the issue. I'll make no comment about whether he's at the top of his scale or not. I'm not as brave as as Mrs. Carney. But thank you for the report, thank you for the progress, and thank you for allowing me to come back, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Diolch yn fawr. If we go to page 160 at the top, where it says family friendly. Working flexibility for men, I just want to ask the question, how much maternity leave does a man get? Secondly, I would like to ask, does man get the ability to work flexible if they want? Thank you.
I keep pressing the wrong button, I do apologise. I can't recall as I sit here what the paternity leave is for gents, so I will check that for you. But yes, every employee has a right to request to work flexibly. Every single employee, yes. It's one of our successful tools, if I can be frank. I think we're a victim of our own success as well. People will have heard me say that we have some issues in terms of our pay model, and that creates recruitment and retention issues in some areas. But because of our complete flexibility, it also enables us to retain some people in certain roles where they might not get that flexibility if they went to another organisation. I see it in my own team. There's an awful lot of the women in my team who could probably earn considerably more in the private sector, but wouldn't have the flexibility and the other terms and conditions that they get for working here, so we keep them. So we do have to look at all of that in the round.
Sorry, Chair. So are you saying that in Flintshire County Council, we have got a more flexibility? Thank you very much.
Councillor Madison, you're indicating.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for this report. I have a question really, which is, I mean, in my 50 years of employment, there were in local government, there were 2 times when my wages absolutely plummeted. And that was when I was a carer, an unpaid carer, first of all for my daughter and then for my parents. And I will say as well that my husband at one point was an unpaid carer for his father. Do we know how much of the workforce are unpaid carers? And an unpaid carer won't always be registered as a carer because you're not paid for it. But you will, for example, request to reduce your hours at work as a carer. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. From a HR perspective, I wouldn't be able to identify them, although social services may. However, we also offer a week's paid carers leave on top of the other leave for those people that do come forward and let us know. So we do provide some additional support for carers.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? Councillor Coggins. Councillor Coggins has preempted my next bit, asking for a proposal for the recommendation. So Councillor Coggins proposed it, Councillor Healy seconded it. Can we have a vote? All those in favour, please. Against? Abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us on to agenda item 11. Before we do that, I'd just like to clarify for Councillor Ibbotson and anybody else who has misunderstood my opening comment. I did make it plain that I wanted to offer everyone the opportunity to ask questions, and if time allowed, I would circulate around those who had further questions. At no point have I said I want to restrict everyone to one question each. That's for clarity. We'll move on to agenda item 11, and this is going to be taken by Dave. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. The revenue report starts on page 173 and provides the latest detailed overview of the budget monitoring position for 25-26. For the council fund, we are reporting an operating deficit of 2.776 million, which with the use of the budget risk reserve, that reduces down to 72,000, which is a positive movement of 1.754 million from the deficit figure of 4.530 million reported at month 9. This then leaves a projected contingency reserve balance at the end of the financial year of 4.472 million, and that's after taking account of the previously approved allocations. In addition to this, there are still a number of risks identified within the report, which I'll pick up as we go through. Also, just to mention as well, as required by financial procedure rules, we still require the action plans, which are identified within Appendix 6 for social services and out-of-county placements, which detail the measures being put in place to improve that position by the end of the financial year. And the moratorium on the non-contractually committed spend and vacancy management process, first put in place in 23-24, has continued through this year, with projected savings so far of 2.314 million. So if I just pick up on the main movements month on month, which is within section 102. Within social services, that's moved by a positive 1.119 million. And firstly, on that one, in older people services localities, there's been a reduction there of 197,000 through difference in demand management. Within children's services, in the main there, that's been the benefit from grant income that's been received. We've been able to reallocate that against the budgeted areas. There's been 99,000 to do with the children's professional support budget, residential placements 203,000, and professional support 370,000. So clearly this grant being received later in the year and being able to be reallocated against spend has really benefited those areas. Place and growth, that moved by a positive 175,000 due to additional fee income that had been received. And on central and corporate finance, that moved by 319,000, and in the main that was another favourable movement on the central loans and investment account. Picking up on the risks that I referred to, just on council tax income, at the end of December, the in-year collection level was at 92.54% compared to 93.03% in the previous year, so marginally down year on year. The waste recycling infraction charge, that continues to be a risk. That is 540,000 that we have as a charge hanging over us for 22-23 and 23-24, plus that excludes any impacts for 24-25. So officers are continuing to meet with Welsh Government to report on the progress for that. So hopefully we'll get a further update fairly soon on that one. Within the report, there is also a carry forward request under place and growth regeneration. The council has lacked an economic development strategy for some years, and the proposal here is that some of that is invested, some of the fee earned income is invested into this, and we're proposing that 40,000 be carried forward into 26-27. In total, there will be 80,000 required for this piece of work, so we're hoping that there will also be the same level of income available in the next financial year. The holiday pay calculations is another risk. The update that we referred to earlier in the agenda was just to update on that further to the preliminary hearing held on the 5th of March 2026. The parties of the council and representatives of the claimants have a number of case management orders to comply with over the coming months, and that will take us to January 2027. But clearly there is still a risk that the final cost will be considerably more than the 254,000 that we currently have set aside in reserves for this purpose. Just picking up on the achievement of planned in-year budget reductions, that still remains at 96%, in line with how that had previously been, but that still overachieves the ambition rate of 95%. Just on unearmarked reserves, I mentioned before about the contingency reserve being 4.472 million. If we add that to the base level of reserves that we maintain of 8985, that gives us 13.457 million. And that is now 3.39% of the overall approved budget, which is up slightly from the 3% that we reported last month. And then finally, if I just pick up on the housing revenue account, that has moved positively by 70,000 at month 10. So that now is a position of 69,000 underspend. And the details of those movements can be found in Appendix 5. Thank you, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions at all? Comments? Nobody's indicating. Oh, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would at this point express my concern about the carry forward request, particularly within 1.13, and it says the council has lacked an economic development strategy for some years. I would ask whether the spending of £80 million of public money on an investment zone with no economic development strategy is therefore sensible if we're doing that without a strategy. I would also query the paragraph on homelessness, paragraph, forgive me, 112. Given that this isn't currently overspent, I would ask about the trajectory there and the extent to which we expect that demand to begin, at the very least, plateauing, if not dropping. However, I won't ask either of those questions because, as you've said, I'm only guaranteed one question. I may or may not get others, and I wish to save my one question for a later agenda item. I just thought I would note the questions that aren't being asked in this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. I can be no clearer on your implication that I'm restricting individuals in this committee to one question across the course of the committee is totally disingenuous. Completely disingenuous. I have made it clear on 2 occasions now that that's not the case. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Homelessness, page 178. We have spent 4.5 million. This still identify as a great risk and levels not falling. Can I ask why is levels not falling? I must say, I'm very proud to say, I don't see homeless persons on the street, and this money is very, very well spent in Flintshire. And I must commend the officers for a good job, what they are doing in this area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So it is a considerable risk area, as you say, because presentations are still increasing. Financially, what we're managing to do is mitigate them by utilising other forms of accommodation rather than B&B, which is managing to keep those costs down and mitigate that risk somewhat. I can't speak for the officers, but I do know following the housing and overview scrutiny yesterday that they are doing an awful lot more work on prevention where possible now that they've got the new team in place. It's hopeful that that will start seeing some positive impacts on presentations, but currently they are still increasing. So it's something that we've just got to keep an eye on from a financial perspective.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Can I seek a proposer for the recommendation, which is the committee considers and comments on the revenue budget monitoring 25-26 month 10 report, and any specific matters for attention will be noted and reported back to Cabinet when it considers the report. Councillor Mullen, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Healy. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. Move on to agenda item 12, artificial intelligence policy. Cabinet Member for Customer Services and Corporate Services. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, members. So the report that you have in relation to AI kind of sets out the wider context, both regionally and nationally, in relation to AI. So it specifically mentions the AI bill, which is in its second reading in the House of Lords at present. We know that 2 of the official UK AI growth zones are in Wales. We've got one in North Wales, one in South Wales. Last year, we had AI Cymru launched around about November 2026, which kind of outlines an overarching plan for Wales in relation to AI, and its key principles and pillars focus on ethics, empathy, enterprise, effectiveness, economic growth, educating Wales, equitable delivery, and excellence and trust. So, as a council, we want to be able to use technology to help us with our wide aims and ambitions specifically related to the council's digital strategy, which is being refreshed at present, but also in relation to service improvement and transformation. In order to do that, we need a policy to make sure that any AI that we do use can be used safely, securely, and ethically. So we've developed and devised a draft policy relating to AI, whose key principles include ethics, transparency, security, compliance, and responsibility. So the policy has been drafted with consideration made in relation to other strategic and operational initiatives and obligations, so things like climate change and carbon reduction, equality, and Welsh language. So we've tried to consult appropriately throughout the process. The policy is very explicit in terms of what is permitted and what is prohibited, and it covers all use of AI tools, whether those are personal tools that a council officer or member may have, but also tools that the council owns and authorises. So there is a large training programme that's been developed, which will be launched alongside the policy, and it is worth noting that training for members will take place separately to the workforce and the rest of the organisation. The policy is very explicit about accountability and ensuring that users are accountable for the content created when they use AI. The Data Use and Access Act of 2025 is very explicit that decisions in relation to the use of AI should not, specifically decisions which affect the rights of an individual should not be made without human input unless the data subject has agreed and the decision is being made to implement a contract or is required by law. But we actually take that one step further and say that no AI will be used to make decisions without human oversight or input. So I think that probably gives you a good summation of the report and what is contained within. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cogan indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the officer for bringing this to us today. It is interesting. My comment, I don't have a question, Chair, so I'm going to ask for your forbearance, is that much of the AI that we use, and in fact is mentioned here, comes from the US. So I know that what I'm saying is beyond the scope of your report. So I'm saying it essentially because I've got the council leader and both deputy leaders here. So I want them to hear it and for us to all be aware, is that recently in the US, the ridiculously named Department for War dismissed an AI contractor because they wouldn't allow their AI to be used to kill enemy combatants without any human oversight whatsoever, which is a repugnant proposition. In response to that, the AI company, with a certain amount of sort of ethical backbone, stepped away. And then the owner of OpenAI and ChatGPT stepped in, rubbing his hands with glee at the amount of money he was going to make from the US Department of War. The reason I'm saying this is that I want part of our procurement, part of our policy, however it's done, you people are brighter than I am, so you'll know how to do it. We have to be incredibly careful of AI products that we use, which come from the United States. We are incredibly reliant upon their software. My telephone here is all American software, and I'm doing my best to get rid of it. But, you know, we use Microsoft 365, things like that. We have to start looking very seriously at our partners in Europe, particularly the French that are developing their own AI models, on how we can use them, because we should only be taking AI from countries which come from a strong, democratic and accountable government. Unfortunately, the recent rhetoric from the United States is moving towards authoritarianism, and the democratic accountability is disappearing by the day. So I would just say to the Leader of the Council, the Deputy Leaders, that we have to look urgently not only to limit the use of American-based AI in our role within the Council and Councils, but also look to replace the existing software products we use with non-US products, because we cannot rely upon them as being a reliable partner in future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your observations. Gareth, you're indicating.
Thank you, Chair. The report references the fact that there was a notice of motion about AI principles last year, and we gave members a commitment that as part of the procurement process, we would want to be looking at what other uses or what other customers potential suppliers had, so that we don't find ourselves in the same position as Coventry City Council, who bought an AI and then found themselves in The Guardian and possibly other newspapers as well, because the AI company from whom they purchased their software also supported the Israeli Defense Force. And I said at the time that we didn't want to find ourselves in that position. Now, we do that at the point of contract. We can, and the part of the issue with the notice of motion was that the notice of motion appeared to want us to continue to do that throughout the lifetime of the contract, which could leave us as an organisation in contractual difficulties. You know, we might end up having to buy our way out of a contract if, at the point of, you know, if that supplier subsequently goes on to do something that we might consider to be reprehensible. So we will check them out at the point of contract. We wouldn't necessarily we wouldn't put ourselves in breach of contract by artificially shortening a contract if the supplier then went on to do something reprehensible. But likewise, we would not extend a contract with somebody who fell into that category, because what we don't want to do is to incur contract breakage costs part way through a contract. So, you know, if members are comfortable with that, that is very much the approach we would want to take.
Thank you. Lisa, can I bring you in as well? You're in.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Coggins-Cogan, I did just want to mention as well, that is very much something that is on our agenda as an IT service, particularly from an information security point of view. We're very aware of the moves that have been made recently by both France and Germany to move away to open source. We're also very aware of the political situation in relation to the data bridge that we have at present with the US, and any impacts that current affairs may have on that. So that is something that we deal with as standard. And I think probably one of the ways that we deal with that is both through our data protection impact assessments, but also through our actual procurement process. The policy details that an IT compliance assessment has to be undertaken for any piece of AI. That is the same as every other piece of software in the organisation. And there are questions that are scored in relation to data specifically, including where it is held, what companies, there may be sub-processors. So we do go into a great deal of depth around those already, and we're continuing to add to that based on the political environment in which we're in at present. And I do think that you're quite right, we need to be quite reactive to that. We also need to ensure we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket, because that could leave us in quite a vulnerable position. You may have seen other things in the news recently relating to foreign kill switches in software, things like that. So we've got to be very careful, not just from an information security point of view, but also from a business continuity and resilience point of view. So that is very much something that's on our agenda. I just wanted to provide that reassurance.
I've got Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am grateful to you for highlighting that you will give a greater degree of latitude than perhaps I had anticipated. First of all, let me say that the issue that Councillor Coggins-Cogan raised is very important, and it was one of the key points of the notice of motion. I'm grateful for the Chief Officer and the IT Manager's comments. I think there's two things that we have to disaggregate here. One is the reputational risk to the council, as with Coventry City Council being involved with a company that, you know, is up to things that we might consider to be reprehensible. In principle, I have absolutely no qualms with us remaining in contract with a company that we have such a relationship with, simply because they're doing something reprehensible elsewhere. Realistically, even if one accepts it is the council's role to procure as ethically as possible and to make a positive difference through its procurement and to avoid contractual relationships with companies that do doing reprehensible things. Most of them are in some way, shape or form, be it Nestle or Palantir. We can't boycott everything. At some point, we have to say, well, our primary job is to serve the residents of Flintshire. To do that, we need certain products and services. The reason that it is important that we do this review more often with AI, though, is because there are risks to the residents of Flintshire if we continue with companies that are doing things that are dangerous to the residents of Flintshire. And where those come to light, we need to have effective and ideally penalty-free break clauses where companies are using the data provided to AI, possibly despite assurances to us that they do not do this. It turns out that they are doing this for the benefit of this country's adversaries. And that is important because that puts residents of Flintshire at risk if we don't break it. And in that circumstance, it's not enough to say, okay, well, we know that residents are being put at risk. We know that their data is being misused, but we've not got a break clause for another 18 months. So we'll just continue allowing it to happen. That is the difference here between the sort of moral, oh, we don't really want to be associated with this, in which case, yeah, wait for the break clause, and the risk to people. And that is not encapsulated in this policy as drafted. I'm grateful for the assurances given verbally on the council's intentions on this, but that point needs to be clarified in writing. I think that's important. I think that's one good thing that can come out of this scrutiny. Secondly, the policy applies to members of this council as well as staff where they are acting in their official capacity, which I warmly welcome. The difficulty is that on pages 4 and 5 of the policy, that's 211 to 12 of the bundle, there are lists there on responsibilities, and we've got senior managers will, employees will, contractors and partners will, and IT services will. There are no responsibilities put on members there who fall into none of those categories. Clearly, some of those responsibilities should apply to members, particularly but not exclusively those within the employees section. So that needs to be clarified lest we get into a situation where councillors are irresponsibly using AI and saying, but the AI policy says I'm allowed to because I have no responsibilities listed. Thirdly, on page 230, very bottom right, closed AI models, there's a paragraph there that says, logging in to your Flincher account will ensure that any activity undertaken within this environment, including search engine use, is protected. Now, that is important because it is not true. If you are logged in to your Microsoft 365 account and you go to Google, a non-Microsoft product, and do a search and it provides an AI response, that is not a closed model. It is not protected by being logged into your Microsoft 365 account. And the rules on what you should be doing in search engines or not doing most definitely apply. This section here implies that it is safe to do that, and it is empirically not. So that needs to be corrected. Equally, the reference to open AI models, given that there is a company called OpenAI, this potentially invites confusion, and so some clarity around the terminology there by what we mean by that, I think, would be helpful to users who might misunderstand OpenAI models to mean the models from the company OpenAI and therefore discount OpenAI models from other companies. So that is also important. If I can turn now to page 216 of the bundle, this is page 9 of the policy, and we're looking at the bullet points in the sort of fourth paragraph from the top. And the first one there, some tools may transfer data outside the UK. This contravenes data protection legislation. It doesn't necessarily to transfer data outside the UK, provided that there are proper security guarantees in place for it. I would also question if we put this policy into force unamended, do we actually have firm guarantees from Microsoft that all data that is provided to Copilot by our users is stored and processed exclusively in UK data centres and none outside the UK? I very much doubt that we have, but I'd welcome clarity on that. Page 217, and this is the very last line of the table there, where we've got prohibited bypassing security controls. AI must not be used to bypass information security controls or breach policies, including the IT acceptable usage and monitoring policy. And this refers as well to page 220, second to last paragraph there, where it says it is forbidden to attempt to bypass. Oh, no, we'll come back to that bit. So going back, to page 217, it says AI must not be used to. An instance of AI may do that without a user requesting that it does. I mean, that is very, very much not unheard of. And given some of the information security procedures that the council has in place, such as banning the sending of emails from personal devices in some circumstances, AI is perfectly happy to send emails because that's what it considers to be like a basic function, the kind of thing that it can do. If it's offering to do things and users click yes, or if it's doing things without even properly consulting the users because it doesn't understand what security is, this places responsibility on the user when they may have not requested that. So it needs to be, it must not be requested that AI do this. There is a wider question here about if we acknowledge that AI, instances of AI paid for by the council may, with user prompt or otherwise, bypass the council's own security controls, which I think we all accept is not only a risk, but at least at a very minor level, a likelihood. I would question whether it is sensible and safe to install these things and give them access to our data, because I think this is a real risk. And this goes back to what I was saying about the risk register. On page 220, where I was going before, second to last bottom paragraph, it says, users must not to use AI to generate content that is discriminatory, offensive, false, or inappropriate. Fine. It is forbidden to attempt to bypass the technology. That implies it is forbidden to not use AI. Right? You cannot bypass AI in your work and do things without using it. the wording of that, it's not clear what's meant by the word bypass there in that context. Presumably it means bypass safeguards on it, but that needs to be clarified, because saying that it is forbidden to attempt to bypass the use of AI implies that if anybody at work is performing any task without the use of AI, then that is forbidden, which clearly shouldn't be the case. Now, probably the most important point I want to make on this concerns, and let me find the page, page 214 of the document pack. And this is page 7 of the policy. And fourth paragraph from the top there, we've got the example prompt. And this is the bit in the policy that is like the how-to, the exemplar of use, not the things we're forbidding, here's how we can really use this and get value out of it. And the example prompt there is: draft a news article to advertise a new digital hub to residents. Use British English and explain that the new hub will be occupied by technical members of staff who are there to assist residents of all ages and abilities to use online services from a local authority. Now, this is the problem, because if you give AI that prompt, it is going to create a page of waffle, because it cannot know the specifics of what's being suggested, where it's going to be, the opening times, the specific functions and services that will be available and which weren't from the council. Now, a human member of staff can add all that in afterwards, but in doing that, creating a load of essentially what is filler and then trying to add pertinent details in will take at least as long, if not longer, than just writing the pertinent details and sending them to the press in the first instance. AI is very good at quantity, but it is not good at quality. And any journalists watching this will be well aware that the amount of press releases they receive from our organisations that have been created using AI it is now an absolute tidal wave of stuff. Almost all of it is unusable because it doesn't contain the pertinent details. It isn't concise. And it makes the stuff that we send out less likely to get printed. Because if we send out stuff that is mostly AI filler with some pertinent details sprinkled in, journalists will disregard what we send out. They will say it's not worth printing.
Councillor Ibbotson, can you draw this to a close, please? I have given you 11 minutes so far. Please.
Yes, of course, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for your making allowances. The point is here that what we're saying as an exemplar is in fact actively harmful to our interests as a council. It makes our stuff less likely to be picked up. And this is obviously the one example, but it is the only example of good use in here. We are setting out this policy, but we have yet to give any example of any kind of generative AI usage within the council that is clear, unequivocal good. And given the risks that Councillor Coggins-Cowan and myself have highlighted, unless we can show that there's some actually good use cases here, we should hold off using it until we think that the good outweighs the harm, because and we've got to be able to encapsulate what that good is, and so far we haven't. So given that, I think this is a hugely improved draft from that was sent to me confidentially a few months ago, and I'm really grateful to everybody who's worked on this for incorporating a lot of what was put in that notice of motion. I think we've made a lot of progress on this, and I really welcome that. But I do not think that we are at the end of this process yet. I do not think that this is in a position ready to pass as yet. This should be an iterative process. There is no rush to approve this now. Let's continue working as we did with the Section 13A policy a few months ago and get to something that everybody can agree is the best possible outcome, as we did with that policy. So I invite colleagues and officers to work constructively in that model.
Thank you for your comments. Gareth, you're indicating. Lisa, I'll come back to you after Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of very useful points in there in terms of drafting. Things like the comment about page 9 where it says this contravenes AI, and Councillor Ribbett says not necessarily. I mean, we're drafting a policy that tries to make sure that we're going to be safe. You know, that is being very cautious in saying this breaches AI. We could have it more nuanced, and indeed we can change it to so it is slightly more nuanced to say this might breach data protection, take advice. But clearly what we've got there is a safe position saying this breaches DP, which would equate to don't do it. So we can pick that up. I agree again, the point about responsibilities on members. Perhaps it's worth being explicit what the responsibilities on members are for assistance. In terms of open and closed AIs, I think the policy does attempt to define it. We can have another look and see whether we can refine that so that it is clear that because that distinction about open and closed AIs is really important to securing our data. So we'll have, can certainly happy to have a look and see whether we can be clearer about distinguishing the company with the name OpenAI from what we mean when we talk about OpenAI. I think the point about use case is needs to be seen in the context of the council as a whole, if I can. Hear councillors' comments in relation to the prompt and whether that is a good or a bad prompt. Where we say we will use AI, we will pick that up as part of the transformation programme, and members will be aware and will recall the governance around the transformation programme includes bringing back transformation projects through CROSC or through another relevant scrutiny committee and through Cabinet for comment and approval. We can see examples, and we know of examples where we would want to proceed, such as transcription of minutes for meetings. It's a time-consuming task. It is one that can be automated. It is one where the council could save money. That's a really good use of AI, provided we can be confident around the security of our data, and provided we can be confident that those minutes are then properly reviewed by a human to ensure that we exclude some of the other problems that you get with AI, such as, or can find with AI, such as gender bias. Then, again, that's a really good use where the council can indeed save money. Okay, except that we may not have the best example in the strategy, but members will see where we go and we'll have the chance to comment where we are talking about specific transformation projects that would involve the use of AI. So members can have that assurance. And this is it's intended to be a very broad policy, isn't it? It's intended to cover the whole of the organisation. It is a much needed policy now, Councillor Ibbotts. I would disagree with the Councillor Chair in saying that we don't need it, because at the moment we have some regulation in place, but it's very limited. And even if it's not perfect, it might be better to get more regulation in place rather than carry on with the slightly less regulated position that we have at the moment. I mean, we've got a simple ban at the moment, or to a large extent, a ban at the moment, but it doesn't provide enough clarity. It doesn't provide enough explanation. And I think we need to be clearer about the explanation and about the limitations that we want to see in order to make sure that people are not, in the absence of that clarity, doing things of which we might not approve if we were to know about them. Mm-hmm. So, as we know, AI, everybody's talking of shoving AI into their products. You've got it in Adobe, to summarize documents, for example. You can't get away from it, and we need to be regulating that. Now, the thing is, AI is moving really quickly. 3 years ago, we probably would not have been having this conversation. I can't remember exactly when GPT went live, which caused this sort of boom and expansion. But prior to that, we wouldn't have been in a situation to have this kind of conversation. And the very, very fast pace of development over that time demonstrates that this is a policy that needs to be reviewed probably annually. We need to have it. We need to have it in, and we need to be reviewing it annually because we need to be keeping up with the technology. And there's a whole world out there that will be innovating in ways that we can't predict at the moment. So we need to, if I can, Chair, put this in place with a commitment that we will review it annually, so that we keep up to speed with the technology, and that will also perhaps give us the opportunity to pick up some of the other concerns. Councillor Ibbotson gave a very long list. I'm hoping Lisa noted them all down. There will be areas where Lisa is better placed to pick up some of those comments than myself, Chair, particularly Councillor Ibbotson was getting into, or the Speaker Chair was getting into some of the technicalities, which Lisa is much better placed to deal with than myself.
Thank you for that, Gareth. I'm about to call Lisa in now as well.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Ibbotson. Yeah, I think Gareth has picked up many of the points that I was hoping to respond to, so I'll try and just go through the ones that he hasn't necessarily. I think the first point was around the being able to understand whether an AI tool had changed how it was using things. So operationally, which is probably something that members won't necessarily be aware of, but as part of our formal contract management processes, those kind of reviews happen as standard, particularly for software products. We've just introduced a process whereby the IT compliance assessment are actually sent out to the contractors at the specific points and break points within contracts to make sure that nothing has changed. Where we have rolling contracts, those will be sent out annually in advance of the rolling annual dates, so that we can make sure that we're getting that information back if there are changes in terms of how these things are being used. I think there is a section in page 212 where it does indicate what councillors will do with AI when acting in official capacity. So we have attempted to provide some detail and clarification there, accepting that there are many nuances in the way that councillors work, things that they will do in their official capacity, things that they'll do slightly outside of that, and again, if they're affiliated with political parties. So we've tried our best to incorporate that as much as we possibly can. Do appreciate the comments in relation to wording. We need to make sure that everybody understands what the policy means. So there are some points that we could pick up there just in relation to terminology and how that is presented. In relation to the point around the contravention of data protection legislation, I think that was a bit of an all-encompassing point, because 95% of the time we find in the DPAs that we've done that it does directly contravene data protection legislation. There are obviously exceptions to that, things where we've got adequacy decisions with countries. I mentioned the data bridge earlier that we've got with the US, contractual clauses, binding rules, but 95% of cases it does actually contravene. So we do deal with that as part of the DPIA, but again, appreciate that may be a bit of a sweeping statement and perhaps we just need to clarify that. I can assure Councillor Ibbotson that all of the data, as part of our enterprise agreement with Microsoft, Copilot, it comes as part of that enterprise agreement. And again, we have data centres in the relevant locations for that. And I think the key takeaway from this is that no tools can be used unless they have undergone an IT compliance assessment, where we have subject matter experts will be asking the relevant questions in relation to data protection and information security. And if a supplier does not pass that assessment, the tool cannot be used. And I think that's the ultimate safeguard that we have. My last point of response would really be in relation to the comment that Gareth made, particularly, I know you mentioned, Councillor Ibbotson, about there being no rush to get it out. But at the moment, as Gareth said, all we've got is a news article that says, don't use AI. We don't have anything that prohibits people from using it. We have been made aware of instances where people are using it, perhaps in instances where they should not be. So we do need to do something. And also it does state in the report that we would be looking to review this policy on an annual basis. We would actually be inviting more stakeholders to participate. We're in the process at the moment, as part of the digital strategy, of setting up an AI working group, which would also feed into any policy updates. So yeah, hopefully I've responded to most of your points, but if there's anything else, I will check the recording and come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this very short because I think my comments may have been answered, but I do have a question. I mean, I'm just speaking as a lay person who knows nothing, if anything at all, about AI and so forth. So my only comment on AI is it, and I think this has been raised, it must be risk assessed. It must be safe to use. One of my main issues with the so-called Doge or Dolge initiative or whatever it was called, that it gave unverified organisations access to thousands of confidential local government records. I also agree it should be ethical at source. I find myself agreeing with Councillor Coggins-Cogan on this, and also that it's accurate. Now, I don't use AI myself, but when you do a quick Google about something, you do get an AI response. And I have noticed a couple of times that the response is inaccurate. For example, if I Google Ruthin Jail Museum opening times, what I expect to get is a response from Denbighshire County Council, the host organisation, not from an out-of-date tourism site which has the incorrect opening hours on. So there's a question of accuracy as well. My question is on training, actually. Would training be offered for councillors on AI? And would this training or possibly be awareness also offered out in the community? And I'm thinking of town and community councils here, but possibly also groups in the community where something like the digital squad could be used. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. So yes, training will absolutely be offered to members. We've developed a couple of different training options. We've got one that's general to the workforce, whereby they can undertake the e-learning that's offered as kind of standard on our Learning at Wales platform. Or actually, it's moved, hasn't it, Sharon? So yes, we will be issuing that at the time. We've also got lots of guidance, and we've got more information going on Top Desk, and we will be liaising with members in early April, well, probably after the Easter break, towards after elections now. But we will be liaising with members, and we're happy to provide training in the way that members want training, because I do appreciate that you're from a broad range of backgrounds. And that some of you may prefer to do an online training module and be quite happy with that. Some of you would prefer to have a face-to-face session. So we will arrange those accordingly. And I think it's a great idea in relation to the digital squads. It was the first thing that I thought of when you raised that. So I will liaise with my counterpart, Rebecca Jones, on that to see if we can get something planned in for their forward work plan. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got one question. My question is on employment. As I see it already now, I've seen this in the media, that AI is interviewing people. And this happened yesterday on the news. I wouldn't like to see any interviews taken in council with AI. Secondly, can AI shorten or make redundant some employees? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Healy. The short answer is no. We've actually faced some issues with recruitment with people using AI when we've had remote interviews. So we've had to take measures to kind of do that. At the moment, we don't use any AI when we're recruiting from our part. And actually, AI is a tool like any other piece of software. We can use it to be more productive. We can use it to be more efficient. We can use it to improve the service that we deliver to our residents. But ultimately, you know, AI is not going to replace a social worker. It's not going to replace many or any that I can foresee of the roles that we have in place in the council at present. I think what it can and should be used for is where we can improve service delivery. So there may be areas where actually it's freeing up people's time particularly from an administrative point of view, so that they can actually crack on with the day job and the stuff that's really important. So that's probably our vision. Gareth did mention that there is stringent governance around anything that goes into strategic transformation programme, which will include full method statements, and that would cover off any kind of impacts as well from a resource point of view. But it's certainly not a vision as part of this policy or part of any strategy to replace roles with AI. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. This is more procedural than anything else, although I'd say I think this debate has been absolutely excellent, very, very fascinating. Just that going through the reports, to address my comments to you, Chair, that both Lisa and Gareth have acknowledged that there are possible amendments that could be made. Yet the recommendation here says that it's going to Cabinet on the 24th. It's also been explained there's a review process, possibly yearly, but the vital point was also made, we need to have something in place. So I'm just wondering what advice the committee plans to give to Cabinet in terms of what we do about some of these possible, quite very, very reasonable changes that have been made. Because as the recommendation stands, we would actually, we would only accept, well, the recommendation of this committee would be for what is on the committee paper. Yet we're saying perhaps we need to be a bit more flexible, so I would value your advice.
I actually think as a clearly defined starting point, the policy as written here is a good starting point. In a previous life, I was responsible for a disparate network spread over most of Liverpool with 3,000 to 4,000 accredited users and something like 1,200 known devices. I introduced that network from ground zero, and I had to start with an acceptable use policy that was despised by every user. But I had to start from a point where this is acceptable, this is not. And as the system developed and as user knowledge and capability changed, I was able to, with my colleagues, develop a much more flexible is the wrong word, but a much more understanding acceptable use policy. I have to say that if I was in Gareth and Lisa's position and the officer's position, I would be writing a 4-word acceptable use policy that started each line with "thou shalt not." That's not the way to go forward these days. I understand that. Your comments about how we get this document as a start point is valid, and I'm very keen as chair that Cabinet have something to provide a start point. We're not saying, and I don't believe we can say this is a perfect document, it will never be perfect, but as AI develops and changes going forward, and as the expectations on officers and members changes, the use of AI is going to become more important. Whether we want to accept it or not, it will, if used properly and developed properly, provide an excellent tool in our toolbox. So yeah, I take your point. It's not for me to determine how this goes forward, but I think if we don't have a start point, we will never be able to develop. We have to have a start point, is my view. Next to speak is Councillor Madison. No, not Councillor Madison, sorry, Councillor Claydon.
Thank you. My point actually follows on quite well from what's just being said. I think we've discussed that issues will arise in the use of the policy. I think also AI is very fast moving. So although this is a starting point, that's all it is. So I would suggest that we add to the recommendation that the new AI policy is adopted and reviewed at least annually.
Councillor Collins-Cogan has indicated to second that. Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Collins-Cogan, you were indicating to speak earlier.
Thank you, Chair. It was mostly to thank Lisa, because I don't know your job title, sorry, and the Chief Officer for governance. I thought the answers were interesting. You obviously have a huge amount of experience. As someone who still uses paper, I'm in awe of the skill set and knowledge you have to have to sort of monitor and deal with AI. It's far beyond my capabilities. So I really thank you for being across the board on it. I just wanted to say that obviously, my starting point was sort of on the horror stories of AI. However, I also wanted to put in a positive word for it, that it has enormously beneficial implications as well. For instance, my husband is a managing partner at a GP practice, and they've introduced AI sort of telephone receptionists. They don't routinely answer calls, but what they do is if a clinician cancels and they have to move a clinic, they can tell the AI to ring 500 people, because they've got unlimited lines, to book them into a new clinic. Now, that would take members of staff an entire day, and that would be most of the staff's job, and it's dull and repetitive, mundane. The AI can book in 500 people, cancel an appointment, give them a new appointment, listen to them where they want to be, when they can do it, blah, blah, blah. That entire job can be done in 5 to 10 minutes. So it does have enormous benefits. And that doesn't mean that those receptionists then become unemployed. What it means is they do more interesting jobs, and their roles are enriched, and they get, they get a more interesting job, which also means then, because they're doing a more interesting job, higher skill set, they get paid more. So this, there are benefits. Obviously, there are enormous pitfalls we have to be aware of, which is why I've endorsed Councillor Claydon's recommendation that we review this annually. But I just wanted to say thank you for your obvious expertise and knowledge, because it's I don't have a clue. May as well be asking me about molecular mechanics or something. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Could I just point out that the policy document itself contains a section, I'll just read it. Policy, this is on page 222, your pack, page 15 of the document, the policy document. This policy will be reviewed every 6 months and updated as necessary to ensure continued compliance. So I would ask, either could we change your proposal to every 6 months, or just accept the document in its form that says policy review every 6 months?
I'm very happy with every 6 months.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Robertson, I'm going to invite you back. Could you please be brief?
I will be even briefer, Mr. Chairman, because you have stolen some of my thunder in pointing out that the policy document says every 6 months. The other quick points are, first of all, during the course of this meeting, I, as very much a non-expert in this, have identified a number of areas where the policy isn't just, the policy as drafted doesn't just not regulate things that we might wish to be regulated, but where the wording is, actively harmful, doesn't read how it's intended, whatever. Now, if I can pick those things out, there will be other things in there, doubtless. So I do think that there is a degree to which not rushing into this is important. I would also note that if the decision's taken on the current timeframes, then any call-in would be during the election period, which is not particularly helpful for anybody concerned. I would therefore suggest that at the very least, this and any alterations to it that might be made as a result of this meeting or any other meetings be taken after the Senate elections, so that we don't wind up with call-ins during that period. I think that's just sensible for everybody. And then finally, on the point about what can I use AI for on page 216 of the bundle, we say explicitly that anybody can use the Microsoft Copilot AI tool, which does lead me to question, if we're specifically allowing that, then things like the environmental impact assessment, the data protection assessment, and so on. Have we done a carbon assessment of Copilot already, and can that be shared with the committee? Can the data protection assessment be shared with the committee? I appreciate this might be under confidential cover. That's fine. I'm not necessarily calling for these to be published at this stage. But I do think it's important that the committee understands that in authorising Copilot for use generally by everybody, that the assessments required have already been done. The policy at the moment, we said, is a sort of "thou shalt not use AI," to paraphrase yourself, Mr. Chairman, but that policy hasn't been formally passed. It's just a sort of news article on the intranet. And that people may be using AI for things that we don't approve of. The fact is that those uses of AI are inherently prohibited, because if people are putting, council information into ChatGPT to get answers or whatever, that is already prohibited in terms of our information security policy. You can't just pass council data to unsecured places on the web, to open AI models on the web. That is already prohibited. So the status quo is we are safe. Now, if that's not being followed, if the information security policy isn't being followed, that is a separate and very, very serious issue. But the status quo is not the Wild West. And so taking a beat to get this right in the first instance, doing it properly is more important than doing it quickly. And so I think the combination of the fact that a number of concerns have been raised in this meeting, that everybody has accepted need tweaks, for us to then recommend that this be passed in its unamended form, I think is dangerous. And I also think that the timescales, what with call-ins and everything, I think it is really, really sensible here if we do take a beat and we come back with a revised version, make sure that no new unintended consequences creep in as a result of any wording that might come out of today. We have proper scrutiny at that point, and we do this right first time. So I think that is a sensible way forward here. So I would move an amendment that the committee welcomes the draft AI policy, and calls for changes to be made reflecting the debate today, and for this to come back to the next overview and scrutiny committee with a revised draft.
Do we have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Swash. So we have a second recommendation. An amendment. Okay, so the amendment has been proposed and seconded. I suggest we move to a vote on any speakers on the amendment. Councillor Coyne-Hogan.
Thank you, Chair. It's mostly to seek advice from the Chief Officer for Governance. So as I understand it, I think that this AI policy is new. It's not replacing something. This is a brand new policy governing AI. I wonder if, because I understand what Councillor Ibbotson is saying, and I have a great respect for what he's bringing to the debate. I am cautious that we're making, the enemy of the good. It's not a perfect policy. Even the officers know it's not a perfect policy because it's the first one we've done. But I think it's a decent enough policy that we can adopt it in the meantime. It's going to be reviewed in 6 months. I would further suggest maybe we delegate, maybe there should be another amendment that we delegate authority to the Chief Officer for Governance, that if there are some glaring holes that people can drive a coach and horses through within the next 6 months, that the Chief Officer for Governance has the authority to change the policy, and then it can be ratified at the next cross committee. I wonder if that's a way forward. I don't think that's obviously seeking approval from Councillor Ibbotson, but I don't see the benefit in not adopting it. I don't see the same issues that Councillor Ibbotson sees in them. And I just think we're aiming for perfect when we've got good in front of us, and I think we should go with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to speak on this myself as well. I think it's hugely important that we have a document. Whether or not that document in itself is flawed, it puts us further forward than we are today by getting a document approved. Once we have a document approved and once we ramp up our use of the technology, as will always be the case, advantages, disadvantages, problems, errors will become apparent as we go through it. We could, quite honestly, debate the rights and wrongs of AI, in my opinion, for days, weeks and months, and still not arrive at concise, detailed answer. The only way we're going to achieve capability is through use. And we will find out where the fall downs are. We will find out where the successes are. Councillor Robertson's concerned. I remember speaking at the notice of motion. We mustn't get ourselves in a situation where we've got a red flag in front of the car going along at 4 miles an hour. Now, I'm not suggesting we go at warp factor 5, but I am suggesting we need this. We need this. I, as a member, I'm desperate for it because I see issues for me in my ward and other issues where AI would be of use to me. But I specifically do not use it because I've not got an acceptable use policy, which I have agreed to, which says you can and you cannot do this. So I would be, obviously from the comments I've made, a fervent supporter of moving forward with care, with caution. 6 monthly reviews seems absolutely sensible to me. And I'm certain that without having to delegate authority to anyone, that if a glaring issue appeared to anyone in the compliance team, on IT, on governance, if something arose, it would be in front of us or in front of council very quickly. Thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions? In that case, we're going to move to a vote on the amendment, which is, I'll get Stephen to read it.
Right. This is what I'm sure I'll be corrected if it's not quite right, but I've taken down that the committee welcomes the draft document in its current form, but calls for changes to be made based on the discussion and comments of the committee today, and to bring back a revised version at the next cross meeting.
So that's what we're
does that
voting
summarise
on.
the position, Councillor Robertson? Yeah.
Yeah. Can we move to the vote on this matter then? All those in favour of the amendment as read? Against? So the amendment falls. We move back to the move back to the substantive, which is that the committee recommends that the Cabinet adopts a new AI policy with effect from 1st of April 2026. Yeah. Yeah, so we can just move straight to the vote on that if no... Oh, Councillor Swash, you're indicating.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that members, including yourself and Councillor Coggins-Cogan, don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this. But I think that the Deputy Leader, Councillor Johnson, when he spoke, made clear that I think Cabinet is minded to try and get this policy into a position where it's better than it currently is, based on the comments that have been made today. So with that in mind, I'd like to move an amendment to the recommendation, which simply adds on the words subject to the issues raised during the debate being resolved by Cabinet prior to adoption.
Would that amendment be acceptable to the proposer and seconder?
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor Clayton's very kindly allowed me to speak for the pair of us. I think if the amendment was the issues to be considered by Cabinet and the Cabinet was to show it's working out in the document, I think that would be better. I think to have resolved, I think then we're going to be chasing our tail and it's going to be delayed further and further down the line.
Councillor Swash, are you happy with that variance to your proposal?
Nothing, so yes.
Thank you. So, we are about to vote on. Oh, we need a seconder for that. Councillor Ibbotson, thank you. I'm going to ask Stephen again in his very best stage voice.
Okay, so the committee recommends that Cabinet adopts the new AI policy with effect from the 1st of April, subject to the issues raised by committee today being considered by Cabinet when it meets to discuss the policy.
All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. Thank you. That brings us to a very tidy break in proceedings. The only other items left on the agenda are part 2 items, so I'm going to propose a 30-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 12:30 to consider the remaining agenda items. Thank you for your forbearance. Welcome back, everyone. If we get on to the next order of business, we need to move into part 2. The following items, agenda item 13, 14, 15, 16 and 17, are considered to be exempt by virtue of paragraphs 14 of part 4 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended. The report contains details of the proposed award of a contract, and the public interest in withholding the information outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information until after the contract has been concluded. I need a proposer. Thank you. A seconder. Thank you. All those in favour?